Welcome, seekers of knowledge and guardians of curiosity. You are about to step into a realm where gods walk beside men, where the sun itself is born and reborn, and where the mysteries of life and death are carved in stone along the banks of the eternal Nile. This is not just history. It is the living heartbeat of a civilization that shaped the very foundation of human imagination. For thousands of years, the people of ancient Egypt looked to the heavens and the underworld, weaving stories of creation, power, love, betrayal, and resurrection. These stories were more than myths. They were the guiding truths of a society that built wonders still standing today. In every temple, in every hieroglyph, the whispers of these gods remain. In this journey, we will uncover the legends of mighty Ra, the trials of Osiris, the magic of Isis, and the wisdom of Thoth. Together, we'll walk through deserts and sacred tombs, hearing echoes of a time when divine and mortal worlds intertwined. So open your mind, sharpen your senses, and prepare, because you are about to enter the timeless world of Egyptian mythology. What if every sunrise was not just the beginning of a new day, but the rebirth of a god? What if death was not the end, but a doorway guarded by divine beings? Welcome to the world of Egyptian mythology, where eternity begins and the gods still speak. Subscribe for more history. Like and comment if you believe history should never be forgotten. And share to spark conversation about the lessons we must learn from the past. This is not myth, this is history. And it begins here, before there was light, before there was land, before even the gods themselves. There was none. An endless, infinite ocean of darkness and potential. The Egyptians believed that all creation began here, in these mysterious waters where silence reigned and time had yet to awaken. Noon was not chaos in the sense of destruction. It was the raw, unshaped possibility from which life could emerge. Within this boundless flood, there was no sky, no earth, no stars, only the promise of existence waiting to be born. From these depths rose a mound, the first land, breaking through the surface of eternity. The Egyptians called it the Benben stone, the sacred mound where creation first touched the void. It was here that the first god would emerge, the radiant Ra, the sun god, who would bring order, light, and life to the world. The priests of Heliopolis would later tell this story as a hymn, that all things came from Nun, and all things would eventually return to it. To the Egyptians, creation was not a single event but a cycle, as eternal as the Nile's flood. As you close your eyes, imagine the endless waters stretching in all directions, dark, infinite, and silent. The stage is set. Creation is about to begin. From the mound that rose above Nun's waters came Ra, the sun god, shining with the brilliance of creation itself. His golden light pierced the eternal darkness, and for the first time, the universe knew day and night. Ra's first breath scattered the shadows. With each heartbeat, his power grew, and with his eyes, he looked upon the waters of Nun and saw the need for order. From his tears, humanity would one day be born. Ra was more than a god. He was the embodiment of light, time, and kingship. Every sunrise was his rebirth, every sunset his death, and every night his journey through the underworld. The Egyptians believed that Ra was both the father and ruler of the gods, and his presence was the spark of all existence. Priests told how Ra created the first divine beings, Shu, the god of air, and Tefnut, the goddess of moisture, who would help shape the cosmos. Together, they would bring balance, separating the heavens from the earth, allowing creation to flourish. Imagine the darkness torn apart by the first rays of sun. illuminating the still waters. Rhea's light is the eternal promise that from nothing life will always find a way. From Ra's creation came the first divine family, the Ennead of Heliopolis, 9 gods, who embodied the foundations of the world. First were Shu, god of air, and Tefnut, goddess of moisture. They embraced and brought forth Geb, the earth, and Nut, the sky. In their love, the heavens and the land were bound together, an eternal embrace that Ra-E had to separate, to allow life to flourish. Shu lifted Nut high, creating the sky, while Gibi lay beneath as the fertile earth. From Geb and Nut came Osiris, ruler of life and death, Isis, goddess of magic, Seth, god of chaos, and Nephthys, the guardian of the dead. Together, they formed the divine order that reflected both harmony and conflict. For even gods were not free from struggle. The Egyptians saw these deities not only as cosmic forces, but as guides for their own lives. The cycles of the Nile, the struggle between order and chaos, the eternal bond of love and family, all were mirrored in the myths of the Ennead. The Ennead was more than mythology. It was the blueprint of existence itself, a divine family tree that explained the balance of the universe. In the heart of Egyptian belief lay a single word that defined the universe: Marat. She was more than a goddess. She was the principle of truth, justice, harmony, and cosmic order. Without Marat, the universe would collapse back into Nun's chaos. Every sunrise was seen as the triumph of Marat. Ra's journey across the sky was only possible because Marat guided him. Pharaohs were not just rulers, they were guardians of Marat, tasked with keeping balance between gods and men, order and chaos, life and death. But for every force of balance, there existed opposition. Isfet, the embodiment of chaos, lurked in shadows, threatening to undo what the gods had built. The struggle between Ma'at and Isfet was eternal. Each day, each action of the people was weighed upon this cosmic scale. Temples, laws, rituals, all were created to honor Ma'at. Priests taught that speaking truth, showing kindness, and honoring the gods were not only virtues, but ways to keep the world safe from destruction. Ma'at was the feather upon which every heart would be weighed in the afterlife. Nephthys Soph, her presence was not just divine, it was personal. To live in Marat was to live in truth, balance, and eternal harmony. Among the Ennead, none inspired as much reverence and love as Osiris, the green-skinned god of fertility, life, and death. To the Egyptians, he was the first king of earth, ruling with wisdom and justice alongside his beloved sister wife, Isis. Under Osiris, Egypt flourished, crops grew tall, and the Nile flooded in abundance. But Osiris's true domain was not just life, it was death. After his betrayal and murder at the hands of his jealous brother Seth, Osiris became the ruler of the underworld. He presided over the dead, not with cruelty, but with fairness, offering eternal paradise in the field of reeds to those who lived in Mafat. Every pharaoh identified with Osiris. In life, they ruled as Horus, son of Osiris. In death, they became Osiris themselves. He symbolized the eternal cycle of death and rebirth, like the Nile's yearly flood. Priests told stories of Osiris as the god who conquered death, not by avoiding it, but by embracing it. He showed humanity that death was not the end, but a passage into a new existence. In every tomb, his image was carved, a promise of eternal life. If Osiris was the king, Isis was the heart, revered as the goddess of magic, healing, motherhood, and devotion. She was the most beloved of the Egyptian pantheon. Her worship stretched far beyond Egypt, reaching Greece and Rome centuries later. Isis's story is one of love and determination. When Set murdered Osiris and scattered his body, Isis searched tirelessly across the land, gathering the pieces of her husband. With her unmatched magic, she reassembled him and breathed life into him once more. From this miracle came their son, Horus, destined to avenge his father and restore divine balance. But Isis was not just a mother to Horus, she was mother to all. Egyptians prayed to her for protection, healing, and guidance. Her wings were symbols of comfort and safety, shielding the weak and blessing the faithful. Isis embodied both strength and compassion. Her wisdom was said to surpass all gods, and her magic rivaled even Ra's. She was proof that love itself could defy death. To the Egyptians, Isis was not just a goddess of the past, she was a presence in their daily lives, a protector, and a reminder that devotion and love were the strongest forms of magic. From the union of Isis and Osiris came Horus, the falcon-headed god, born to avenge his father and restore balance to the world. He was more than just a son. He was the eternal symbol of divine kingship. Every pharaoh of Egypt was considered the living Horus, ruling with the god's strength, vision, and authority. Horus grew up hidden from Seth's wrath, raised by Isis in the marshes of the Nile Delta. There he learned the ways of survival, trained in combat, and prepared for his destiny. His falcon eyes saw far and true, piercing through lies and darkness. When he came of age, Horus confronted Set in a series of legendary battles, sometimes victorious, sometimes wounded. Horus never surrendered. In one tale, Set tore out Horus's eye, but Thoth healed it, and the restored eye of Horus became a symbol of protection and power. Horus's struggle was not just personal. It represented the eternal battle between order and chaos, and was rightful rule and tyranny. His victory was Egypt's victory, ensuring that every pharaoh ruled under divine sanction. To the Egyptians, Horus was the falcon soaring across the sky, a guardian watching over kings, warriors, and the people themselves. Where Horus symbolized order, Set embodied chaos. He was the god of storms, deserts, and destruction, feared and respected for his raw power. Born of Geb and Nut, Set's nature was restless and untamed, forever challenging balance. Set's most infamous act was his betrayal of his brother Osiris. Consumed by envy of Osiris's throne, Set lured him into a beautifully crafted chest, sealed it, and cast it into the Nile. Later, he dismembered Osiris's body, scattering it across Egypt. This act plunged the world into darkness, but it also set the stage for Horus's rise. Yet Set was not purely evil. In some traditions, he was the necessary defender of Ra, standing at the prow of the sun god's boat to slay the serpent of chaos, Apophis, during the nightly journey through the underworld. He was both destroyer and protector, chaos and strength. The Egyptians understood Set as a force that could never be destroyed, only balanced. His presence was the desert winds, the sudden storms, and the struggles of life itself. To invoke Set was to summon power, but also to risk the unraveling of Ma'at. He was the eternal reminder that chaos always waits, just beyond the edge of order. When death came, the Egyptians turned to Anubis, the jackal-headed god of mummification and protector of souls. He was the guide who led the dead safely into the afterlife, ensuring they were not lost in the shadows. Anubis's origins stretched deep into Egypt's past, even before Osiris rose as lord of the underworld. He was seen as the first to perform the sacred rites of embalming, preserving Osiris's body after his murder. From that moment, Anubis became the eternal guardian of the dead. He was neither cruel nor merciful. He was impartial, devoted to justice and protection. Anubis oversaw the weighing of the heart ceremony, where each soul's heart was placed upon the scales against the feather of Ma'at. If the heart was pure, Anubis guided the soul to Osiris. If not, he delivered it to Ammit, the devourer of the damned. Jackals, often seen wandering near cemeteries, were believed to be his sacred animals. His presence comforted the Egyptians, for they knew that in death they would not be alone. Anubis would walk beside them. He was the silent guardian, the watchful eye in the darkness, and the eternal protector of the soul's final journey. Among the gods of Egypt, few held as much respect for their wisdom as Thoth. Depicted with the head of an ibis, or sometimes a baboon, Thoth was the god of knowledge, writing, science, and the moon. He was the scribe of the gods, recording every word, every judgment, and every law that shaped the universe. It was Thoth who invented hieroglyphs, gifting humanity the ability to record history and preserve knowledge. Without him, the great temples, spells, and sacred texts of Egypt would never have survived. The priests called him Lord of Time, for he measured the movement of the stars, guided the lunar cycles, and balanced the calendar. But Thoth was more than a scholar. He was also a mediator. When Horus and Seth fought endlessly for Egypt's throne, it was Thoth who kept peace, healing Horus's eye and recording the judgments of Rak. He was a god who sought balance, not through power, but through wisdom. To the Egyptians, Thoth was a friend in study, a protector in magic, and the guide of scribes. His presence was in every word written, every calculation made, every ritual performed. Thoth's wisdom was eternal, a light in the darkness of ignorance. The most tragic tale in Egyptian mythology begins with betrayal. Osiris, beloved king of Egypt, brought prosperity and justice to the land. But his brother Seth, consumed by envy, could not bear his success. Seth devised a cruel plan. At a grand feast, he presented a magnificent chest, crafted of cedar and jewels, promising it to whomever it fit perfectly. One by one, the guests tried, but only Osiris lay inside with perfection. In an instant, Seth slammed the lid, sealed it with molten lead, and hurled the chest into the Nile. The people mourned as their king drifted away, powerless within the box. The Nile carried him far from Egypt, into foreign lands, where the chest came to rest beneath a tamarisk tree. Yet this story was not the end. It was the beginning of hope, for Isis, the faithful wife, would not allow death to silence her love. A search for Osiris would become one of the greatest stories ever told. When Isis learned of her husband's murder, her heart broke, but her spirit did not. She swore she would find Osiris and restore him, no matter the cost. Guided by love and magic, she began her long journey across Egypt and beyond. Isis wandered the Nile, her wings spread wide as she searched for her beloved. In every village she asked for signs. Her tears watered the land, and her prayers stirred the gods themselves. Finally, she discovered the chest in Byblos, hidden within the roots of a sacred tree. With patience and cunning, Isis retrieved Osiris's body and carried it back to Egypt. But Set, relentless in his hatred, struck again, tearing Osiris apart and scattering his pieces across the land. Undeterred, Isis continued her quest. She traveled to every corner of Egypt, gathering the fragments of Osiris with the help of her sister, Nephthys. Piece by piece, she restored him. Through her divine magic, Isis breathed life into her husband long enough to conceive their son, Horus, the avenger of Egypt. Her devotion became a symbol of eternal love and perseverance. To the Egyptians, Isis was not only the goddess of magic, She was the embodiment of loyalty and hope. The struggle for Egypt's throne was more than a family quarrel. It was the eternal clash between order and chaos. When Horus came of age, he stood against his uncle Set, determined to avenge Osiris and restore balance. Their battles raged for years, filling both heavens and earth with conflict. In one duel, Set gouged out Horus's eye, shattering his vision. But Thoth, the wise scribe, restored it with magic, and the healed eye of Horus became a symbol of protection, power, and wholeness. The gods themselves grew weary of the conflict. Ra convened a divine tribunal, and the Ennead debated who should rule. At times, Horus gained favor, and at others Set's cunning won him sympathy. Yet the cycle continued. Combat after combat, trial after trial. In the final contest, Horus triumphed. He pinned Set beneath him and claimed his rightful throne. But the gods did not destroy Set. Instead, he was given dominion over the deserts and storms. Forever exiled from fertile Egypt, Horus's victory crowned him as the divine king. From that day forward, every pharaoh of Egypt bore the title Living Horus, ruling as the god's earthly embodiment. The triumph of Horus was the triumph of order, showing that justice would always endure. Each morning the Egyptians believed. Ra set out on his journey across the sky in his solar bark. His golden light illuminated the world, chasing away shadows and giving life to crops and people alike. But when the sun set, Ra's journey was far from over. At night he descended into the underworld, the Duat, where dangers lurked in every corner. There, Ra faced Apophis, the great serpent of chaos, who sought to devour the sun and plunge creation into eternal night. Each night the battle raged. Set, though often despised, stood at the prow of Ra's boat to defend against Apophis, wielding his immense strength to strike the serpent. Thoth recited spells, while other gods guarded the vessel. If Ra triumphed, the dawn would return. If he failed, all would be lost. The Egyptians believed their prayers helped Ra in this struggle. Every sunrise was not just a natural event. It was a victory, a promise that Ma'at still held firm. To witness the dawn was to witness creation reborn. The journey of Ra was more than myth. It was the daily heartbeat of the universe. Gentle yet fierce, Bastet was the cat-headed goddess of home, fertility, and protection. She embodied grace and affection. Yet beneath her beauty lay the heart of a lioness, ever ready to defend Egypt. Originally depicted as a lion-headed warrior, Bastet evolved into the beloved cat goddess, reflecting the Egyptians' adoration for felines. Cats were sacred in Egypt, protectors of homes from serpents and pests, and symbols of divine guardianship. To harm a cat was a crime against the goddess herself. Bastet's festivals were among the most joyous in Egypt. Pilgrims traveled to Bubastis, her sacred city, singing, dancing, and offering music in her honor. They believed she blessed women in childbirth, guarded families, and brought peace to households. But Bastet was not only gentle. When angered, she could transform into Sekhmet, the lioness goddess of destruction, a reminder of her dual nature. This balance between love and ferocity made her one of the most cherished deities in Egypt. To the people, Bastet was both mother and warrior, both playful and powerful. She was the comfort of a purring cat, and the claws that struck at enemies in the dark. When humanity rebelled against the gods, Ra grew weary of men's arrogance. In his fury, he created Sekhmet, the lion-headed goddess of war and vengeance. From the fire of his own eye, she descended upon Egypt like a storm, her roars shaking the desert, her claws tearing through armies. Sekhmet's hunger for blood was insatiable. She slaughtered rebels mercilessly. her paws dripping with the lifeblood of those who defied Ra. The people trembled, for she could not be stopped. The desert sands themselves turned red with her fury. But as days passed, Ra saw that Sekhmet's wrath threatened to destroy all mankind. The world teetered on the edge of annihilation. To save humanity, Ra devised a trick. He ordered red-dyed beer to be poured across the fields, so it resembled blood. When Sekhmet drank the river of crimson beer, her fury dulled. Drunk and pacified, she transformed into her gentler form, Hathor, goddess of love and joy. Thus the destruction ended, and mankind was spared. This myth revealed both the terror and mercy of the gods. Sekhmet was a reminder that divine power could save or destroy, and that even gods must balance wrath with compassion. The story of Sekhmet's wrath was remembered as the destruction of mankind, one of Egypt's most powerful myths. Humanity, in its arrogance, turned against Ra, questioning his authority as king of the gods. Ra, enraged, called a council of gods. They advised him to send forth his eye, the divine power that punishes the wicked. From this eye was born Sekhmet, fierce and unyielding. She descended with fire and slaughter, her claws spreading death wherever she went. The people begged for mercy, but Sekhmet was relentless. Villages fell silent, their fields soaked in blood. Humanity, it seemed, would vanish from existence. At last, Ra pitied mankind. He ordered vast quantities of beer dyed with ochre to resemble blood, filling the land like a crimson flood. Sekhmet, driven by her thirst, drank until she staggered. Her rage melted into laughter, her wrath transformed into joy. Thus, she became Hathor, goddess of love, music, and celebration. Each year, Egyptians honored this myth with festivals of intoxication and music, remembering the day when humanity was spared from annihilation. It was a story of divine justice, but also of mercy, a lesson that even gods must temper power with compassion. As Ra grew older, the burden of ruling both gods and men weighed heavily upon him. The people conspired against him, and Ra's wrath brought forth Sekhmet, as in the tale of the destruction of mankind. Yet after peace was restored, Ra sought to withdraw from humanity forever. It was then that the heavenly cow appeared, a divine cow goddess, often linked to Hathor, who lifted Ra upon her back and carried him away from earth into the heavens. From her body, the stars and constellations were born, and the sky itself became her vast form. This myth explained how Ra distanced himself from humanity, choosing to dwell in the sky, while still granting light and life from above. It was also the origin of the separation between gods and men. Once, they had lived together, but now the heavens and earth were divided. The heavenly cow symbolized fertility, nurturing, and the vastness of the cosmos. Egyptians saw in her the embodiment of motherhood and creation, the eternal provider who bore the weight of the world. Through this story, they understood why the gods no longer walked among them, yet still watched from the heavens above. Every day, the Egyptians lifted their eyes to the sky and imagined the sun god, Ra, sailing across the heavens in his solar bark, a divine ship crafted from light and eternity. This boat carried Ra and his companions across the sky, during the day, bringing warmth, order, and life to the world. But when the sun set, the boat did not vanish. Instead, Ra descended into the Duat, the underworld, beginning a perilous journey through darkness. In the depths of the Duat, monstrous spirits lurked, demons prowled, and at the center coiled the great serpent, Apophis, who sought to devour the sun. Each night, the gods boarded Ra's boat to defend him. Set, despite his nature of chaos, fought valiantly at the prow, striking at Apophis with spears of lightning. Thoth spoke spells of protection, while other gods guarded the vessel. Humanity's prayers were believed to give Ra strength during this battle. At dawn, Ra triumphed, rising once more from the eastern horizon. The celestial boat was not just a vessel. It was the heartbeat of the cosmos, ensuring that light would always return after darkness. To the Egyptians, every sunrise was proof that Ra had once again overcome the night. Even the mightiest gods had secrets. For Ra, his greatest secret was his true name, the source of his divine power. Whoever knew it could command him, even against his will. The goddess Isis, wise and cunning, desired this power, not for herself, but to secure her son, Horus's rightful throne. She devised a plan. One day, she crafted a serpent from earth and Raum's own saliva. She placed it upon the path where Ra walked. And when he passed, the serpent bit him with venom so powerful that even the sun god staggered. In agony, Ra called upon the gods to heal him, but none could. Isis came forth, promising to cure him, if only he revealed his hidden name. At first, Ra resisted, reciting all his titles and deeds, yet the poison burned deeper, and his strength waned. At last he whispered his true name into Isis's ear. With his secret known, Isis cured him instantly. She did not reveal his name to others, but from that day forward, she held unmatched magical power, ensuring Horus's destiny as king. This story showed the Egyptians that knowledge was power, and that even the mightiest gods were vulnerable to wisdom and cunning. To the Egyptians, death was not the end, but a journey into judgment. At the gates of the afterlife, every soul faced the weighing of the heart ceremony, overseen by the gods. The heart, believed to carry one's deeds and soul, was placed upon a golden scale. On the other side rested the feather of Ma'at, symbol of truth and justice. Anubis, jackal-headed guardian of the dead, guided the ceremony, ensuring balance and fairness. Thoth, scribe of the gods, recorded the outcome with precision. If the heart was lighter than the feather, the soul was declared pure and was led to Osiris, who welcomed the faithful into the field of reeds, an eternal paradise. But if the heart was heavy with lies, betrayal, or injustice, the soul faced doom. Amit, the devourer of souls, crouched by the scales, part crocodile, lion, and hippopotamus. If the heart failed, she devoured it whole, condemning the soul to eternal nothingness. This ritual reflected the Egyptians' deep belief in Ma'at, in truth, justice, and balance. To live a good life was to prepare for this final judgment, where no wealth or power could tip the scales, only the purity of the heart. The ancient Egyptians did not leave their journey into the afterlife to chance. They prepared with spells, prayers, and sacred writings collected in a text known as the Book of the Dead. Far from a single book, it was a collection of papyrus scrolls, each tailored to the soul of the deceased, filled with instructions to navigate the trials of the underworld. These texts were guides, maps through the Duat, charms against demons, and invocations for protection. Among its most famous passages was the negative confession, where the soul declared innocence of sins before the gods. I have not stolen, I have not killed, I have not lied. Each line was a plea for purity before the judgment of Osiris. The book also contained spells to open gates, avoid traps, and even transform into animals should the soul need to escape danger. To Egyptians, knowledge was power, and no knowledge was more valuable than that which ensured eternal life. Copies were placed in tombs, written on walls, or painted upon coffins. With the Book of the Dead, a soul had hope of reaching the field of reeds, the paradise where the... It was not a story of death, it was a story of survival, of the eternal struggle to overcome darkness and reach the light. The Duat, the Egyptian underworld, was not simply a place of shadows. It was a vast and perilous realm filled with rivers of fire, guarded gates, monstrous beings, and endless trials. To reach eternal paradise, every soul had to travel through it. Guided by Anubis or protected by spells from the Book of the Dead, the journey began after burial. The soul sailed across the waters of the Duat on a small boat, passing through 12 gates, each guarded by fierce deities who demanded secret names and passwords. Without them, the soul could not pass. Demons with twisted bodies lurked in the darkness, ready to tear apart the unprepared. Rivers of boiling water scorched the unwary, but there were also helpers, spirits who offered food, water, and safe passage. If properly honored, the most terrifying challenge was facing Apophis, the serpent of chaos, who sought to swallow the soul into oblivion. Only courage, knowledge, and divine favor could ensure survival. At the end of this treacherous journey, the soul reached the hall of Ma'at, where its heart would be weighed. Only then, if pure, could the soul enter the field of reeds. The Duat was not just an afterlife. It was a test of truth, a mirror of one's life lived. If a soul failed in the judgment of the afterlife, its fate was not torment, but oblivion. At the scales of Ma'at, when the heart was found heavier than the feather of truth, the soul was handed to Ammit, the devourer. Ammit was a terrifying hybrid, head of a crocodile, forebody of a lion, hindquarters of a hippopotamus. She embodied the 3 deadliest beasts known to the Egyptians. To encounter her was to face the end of existence. Unlike demons who tortured, Ammit was impartial. She devoured only the unworthy, swallowing their hearts and erasing their essence. To the Egyptians, this was the ultimate fear. Not punishment, but the loss of identity, the erasure of one's soul from eternity. Depictions of Ammit appeared on tomb walls as a warning. To live in Ma'at was to avoid her jaws. To lie, cheat, or live in injustice was to risk becoming her prey. In rituals, priests invoked her name to remind the living. Justice was not only divine, it was survival. For Ammit waited, for all who strayed from truth. She was not worshipped nor honored, but feared, a shadow at the edge of eternity. For the ancient Egyptians, the ultimate reward after a life lived in Ma'at, truth, balance, and justice, was entry into the field of reeds. This was their vision of paradise, a perfect mirror of life on earth, but free of hardship, hunger, or suffering. The field of reeds, known as Rru, stretched endlessly with fertile fields, crystal-clear waters, and abundant crops. The Nile flowed calmly, its banks lined with golden reeds that shimmered like sunlight. The blessed dead could hunt, farm, and feast forever, surrounded by family, friends, and even beloved pets. Life continued as they had known it, but without pain, aging, or loss. At the gates, Osiris awaited, seated upon his throne. With him stood Isis, Nephthys, and other gods of protection. Those who passed the weighing of the heart ceremony were welcomed with open arms. They were granted homes, tools, and even servants, called Ushabti figurines, to work for them in eternity. The field of reeds reflected Egypt's deepest hope, that life did not end in death, but blossomed into something everlasting. Farmers dreamed of plowing eternal fields. Nobles imagined gardens overflowing with beauty. Mothers envisioned endless time with their children. It was not a place of idleness, but of joyful purpose. Work was no longer toil, but a gift, forever rewarded by abundance. To the Egyptians, heaven was not distant or abstract. It was home perfected, a paradise where the soul lived in peace. United with the gods and ancestors for all eternity in the heart of Egyptian belief, the pharaoh was far more than a king. He was the living embodiment of Horus, the falcon god of kingship. From the moment of coronation, the pharaoh carried not only the crown of Egypt, but also the divine duty to uphold Ma'at, the balance of truth, justice, and order across the land. As Horus incarnate, the pharaoh was protector of his people and defender against chaos. Every decree he made was not just political, it was divine. His word was law, because it echoed the voice of the gods themselves. When the pharaoh led armies, he was Horus striking down Seth. When he performed rituals in temples, he was Horus honoring Ra, Osiris, and the great Ennead. The pharaoh also stood as the bridge between gods and men. He alone could approach the divine directly, offering prayers and sacrifices that kept Egypt in harmony with the heavens. Yet he was not immortal in life. When he died, Egyptians believed the pharaoh transformed into Osiris, ruler of the afterlife. His successor, usually his son, became the new living Horus, continuing the eternal cycle of kingship. This dual identity, Horus in life, Osiris in death, ensured the continuity of divine rule. Pharaohs carved their images on temple walls as falcons soaring over enemies, or as mighty figures crowned with the Shent, the double crown of Upper and Lower Egypt. Their tombs and pyramids were not only places of burial, but also stairways to eternity, affirming their godly nature. To the Egyptians, obeying the pharaoh was not just loyalty to a ruler, but devotion to Horus himself. He was the sun rising each morning, the falcon guarding the sky, and the living proof that the gods walked among men. To the ancient Egyptians, temples were not simply places of worship. They were living houses of the gods, sacred spaces where heaven touched the earth. Each temple was built as a dwelling for a specific deity, carefully designed to reflect the divine order of the cosmos. At the temple's outer gates, grand pylons towered like mountains, representing the horizon where the sun rose each day. Beyond lay open courtyards, where the public could gather during festivals. Yet deeper inside, the temple grew more secretive and holy. Priests, not common people, passed through hypostyle halls filled with colossal columns carved with sacred hymns and hieroglyphs. At the very heart of the temple stood the sanctuary, a small, dark chamber where the god's statue rested within a shrine. This was the god's physical body on earth, clothed, fed, and tended daily by priests. Each morning, the statue was awakened with hymns, bathed, dressed in fine linen, and offered food, incense, and drink. At night it was laid to rest, just as a king would be. Temples were also centers of knowledge and power. Priests preserved sacred texts, studied astronomy, and performed complex rituals. Festivals brought life to the temples. When the statue of the god was carried out in procession, sailing across the Nile, or paraded through the streets, so the people could feel the presence of their deity. To the Egyptians, these rituals were not symbolic. They were essential. By caring for the gods, they ensured that the gods cared for Egypt. Every offering, every chant, every gesture maintained Malat, keeping the world in balance. Even today, the ruins of Karnak, Luxor, and Abu Simbel stand as silent witnesses to this devotion. Though the voices of priests have faded, the stones still echo the prayers of a people who believed their gods truly lived among them. At the heart of Egyptian temples stood not only the statues of the gods, but also the priests, men chosen to serve as caretakers of the divine. Among them, the high priests held the greatest authority, acting as intermediaries between gods and mortals. Their rituals were considered vital to sustaining the balance of the universe. Each day, before the first rays of Ra touched the horizon, the high priest entered the temple's sanctuary. Purified through ritual baths, dressed in spotless linen, and perfumed with sacred oils, he approached the shrine with reverence. Silence filled the air as he opened the doors of the god's shrine, awakening the deity with hymns. The rituals were precise, washing the statue, clothing it in fine garments, adorning it with jewelry, and presenting offerings of bread, beer, wine, fruit, and incense. These acts were not symbolic. They were believed to literally nourish and sustain the gods. Without them, the divine presence might abandon Egypt, leaving chaos in its wake. Beyond daily offerings, high priests conducted elaborate ceremonies during festivals. They recited long prayers from papyrus scrolls, invoked protective spells, and carried sacred barks of the gods through temple courtyards and along the Nile. The people gathered in awe, witnessing the divine presence brought into their midst. The role of high priest was one of power and responsibility. They held knowledge of sacred texts, astronomy, and medicine. Their words guided kings, and their decisions shaped the lives of ordinary people. Yet their service was not for themselves. It was for the gods, for Pharaoh, and for the maintenance of Marat. To the Egyptians, these rituals were not superstition, but cosmic necessity. Every hymn and gesture echoed through eternity, ensuring that the gods continued to bless the land with prosperity, fertility, and protection. Even today, when we walk through the ruins of Karnak or Luxor, we can almost hear the chants of the high priests rising to the heavens, keeping the universe in perfect balance. Silent and eternal, the great Sphinx of Giza has watched over the sands of Egypt for thousands of years. With the body of a lion and the head of a king, it is the oldest and most mysterious monument of ancient Egypt, a riddle carved in stone. The Egyptians believed the Sphinx was more than a statue. It was a guardian. Facing east, it greeted the rising sun, protecting the sacred necropolis of Giza and the pyramids behind it. Its lion's body symbolized strength, while its human head represented wisdom and divine authority. Some believed it embodied the pharaoh Khafre, fusing man and God into a single, eternal protector. Legends told of the Sphinx as a keeper of secrets. In Greek myth, the Sphinx posed riddles to travelers, but in Egypt, its silence was its mystery. Priests whispered that beneath its massive paws lay hidden chambers, storing the wisdom of the gods and secrets of the cosmos. Over the centuries, wind and sand weathered its face, yet the Sphinx endured, inspiring awe and reverence. To the Egyptians, it was a timeless reminder that kingship was sacred, guarded by divine strength and rooted in eternity. The Sphinx was not just stone. It was the voice of the gods in silence. The pyramids of Egypt stand as some of the most awe-inspiring monuments ever built, but to the Egyptians they were far more than tombs. They were stairways to eternity. The pyramid's shape symbolized the Benben stone, the sacred mound that first rose from Nun's waters at creation. Its sloping sides reflected the rays of the sun, guiding the soul of the dead pharaoh upward toward the heavens, where he would join Ra and the gods. Inside, hidden chambers, passageways, and burial rooms were filled with treasures, spells, and offerings. The king's body was preserved through mummification, ensuring that his soul, or Ka, would live forever. The walls of the tomb were inscribed with spells from the pyramid texts, some of the earliest sacred writings, which helped guide the pharaoh through the Duat into eternal life. The Great Pyramid of Khufu at Giza, the largest of them all, was considered a wonder even in ancient times. Built with millions of stone blocks, perfectly aligned to the stars, It was not just an architectural feat, it was a spiritual machine, connecting earth with the divine. The pyramids proclaimed that the pharaoh was not merely a ruler, but a god destined for eternity. Their presence was a constant reminder that kingship was eternal, that order must be maintained, and that life and death were but steps in the great cycle of existence. Even now, the pyramids stand as silent giants, eternal symbols of humanity's quest for immortality. In the land of Egypt, where gods and spirits walked beside mortals, amulets and charms were more than ornaments. They were shields of power, infused with divine magic. Egyptians of all classes, from pharaohs to farmers, wore them as protection against danger, illness, and misfortune. Each amulet carried its own meaning. The eye of Horus, called Wedjat, symbolized health and protection, guarding against evil. The scarab beetle, rolling the sun across the sky, promised rebirth and eternal life. The ankh, shaped like a cross with a loop, represented the gift of life itself. Amulets were crafted from precious stones, faience, or gold, chosen carefully for their magical properties. Lapis lazuli was believed to channel wisdom, turquoise brought joy, and carnelian carried the heat of life. Priests blessed these objects with sacred words, awakening their hidden powers. In tombs, amulets were placed upon mummies, each spellbinding charm protecting the soul on its journey through the Duat. The heart scarab was especially vital, inscribed with spells to silence the heart during judgment, ensuring the deceased could pass the scales of Ma'atat. To Egyptians, amulets were living magic, bridges between mortal hands and divine power. They were proof that the gods cared for even the smallest details of life, offering comfort, strength, and hope. For the Egyptians, magic, called Heka, was not superstition. It was the very fabric of the universe, the divine force given by the gods at creation. To live without magic was unthinkable, for it touched every part of life, from birth to death. Mothers whispered protective spells over newborns, invoking Hathor or Taweret, the hippo goddess of childbirth. Farmers prayed to Hapi, god of the Nile, before planting their crops, asking for fertile floods. Soldiers carried charms into battle, invoking Sekhmet to give them courage. Even simple households used spells to keep away scorpions, snakes, or wandering spirits. Magicians, often priests, were called upon to heal the sick, foretell the future, or even summon divine visions. They recited words from sacred papyri, drew protective symbols on ostraca pottery shards, and mixed potions of herbs. These rituals were believed to be effective because they were not separate from religion. Magic was religion, and religion was magic. The pharaoh himself relied on Heka, for without it he could not rule. His crown, staff, and even throne were infused with protective magic, linking him to the gods. To Egyptians, magic was the greatest gift. It was life's hidden current, guiding their daily struggles, their hopes, and their dreams. It was proof that the divine was never far away. For the ancient Egyptians, animals were not merely creatures of the earth. They were living symbols of the divine. Each species carried sacred meaning, embodying the powers and personalities of the gods. To harm a sacred animal was to offend the gods themselves. Cats were perhaps the most beloved. Associated with Bastet, they symbolized protection and grace. Families kept cats in their homes, believing they warded off evil spirits and brought blessings. Their mummified remains, found in thousands, testify to their divine role. Falcons, soaring high above the Nile, embodied Horus, the sky god. Their sharp eyes and swift flight made them perfect symbols of kingship, watchfulness, and protection. Pharaohs wore the falcon as their emblem, ruling as Horus incarnate. Crocodiles, feared and revered, were linked to Sobek, god of strength and fertility. In temples near the Fayum, Sacred crocodiles were kept, fed, and even mummified when they died. They were protectors, but also warnings of untamed power. Ibises with long curved beaks were sacred to Thoth, the god of wisdom. Their patient movements reflected knowledge and calculation, guiding scribes and priests. Resectus. Even animals like bulls, jackals, and scarab beetles carried divine meaning, each a reminder that the natural world was infused with spiritual energy. For Egyptians, animals were more than companions. They were the bridge between the mortal and the divine, showing that gods lived not only in the heavens, but also in the life around them. No element of Egypt was more vital than the Nile River. To the Egyptians, it was not simply a body of water. It was the very lifeblood of the land, a divine gift that sustained both gods and mortals. Every year, the Nile flooded its banks, spreading rich black soil across the fields. This annual event, called the inundation, was seen as a blessing from the gods, especially from Hapi, the Nile god of fertility. Without the flood, crops would fail and famine would follow. With it, Egypt thrived. Teague. The Nile was also the sacred highway of Egypt. Boats carried people, goods, and even the statues of gods during great festivals. Pharaohs built temples along its banks, and priests performed offerings on its waters, thanking Hapi for life itself. But the Nile was not only about life, it was also the river of death. Egyptians believed the journey to the afterlife mirrored a boat trip across the Nile. The west bank, where the sun set, was the land of the dead, while the east bank, where the sun rose, was the land of the living. The river itself was filled with sacred animals, crocodiles, linked to Sobek, fish, symbols of abundance, and birds, symbols of the soul. To the Egyptians, the Nile was a god, a path, and a promise. It was the source of their survival and the sacred thread that tied heaven and earth together. For the Egyptians, religion was not confined to temples. It overflowed into the streets through festivals of the gods, great celebrations that united the divine and the mortal. These events were both sacred rituals and joyous gatherings, moments when the people could feel the living presence of their deities. Among the most famous was the Opet festival in Thebes. Each year, the statue of Amun, along with Mut and Khonsu, was carried from the Karnak temple to Luxor temple. The journey, often along the Nile, symbolized the renewal of kingship and the fertility of the land. Crowds gathered, singing, dancing, and offering prayers as the god's bark glided past. The festival of Hathor in Dendera was another beloved event. Pilgrims traveled for miles to honor the goddess of love and joy, filling the air with music, sistrums, and laughter. Even Bastet's festival at Bubastes was so popular that ancient Greek historians described it as one of the grandest celebrations in the world. Men and women sailed up the Nile with music and wine, dancing wildly in honor of the cat goddess. Festivals were times of release and renewal. They honored the gods with offerings and rituals, but they also gave ordinary people a chance to feast and embrace life. In these moments, the boundary between mortal and divine dissolved, and Egypt itself became a temple under the open sky. For over 3,000 years, Egypt's gods, pharaohs, and temples stood in power. But even the mightiest civilizations faced decline. The fall of ancient Egypt was not a single moment, but a long, gradual fading of divine order. Internal struggles weakened the pharaohs. Rival dynasties fought for the throne, while powerful priests often challenged royal authority. Foreign invaders, Libyans, Nubians, Assyrians, and Persians, conquered Egypt one after another, each leaving their mark. Yet it was the arrival of the Greeks and later the Romans that truly transformed Egypt. Alexander the Great was welcomed as a liberator, but under his successors, the Ptolemies, Egyptian traditions blended with Greek culture. The gods endured, but their temples became filled with foreign influences. Finally, with Rome's conquest, the old religion began to wither. Christianity swept across Egypt, and the temples fell silent. Statues of gods were toppled, and rituals of priests were forgotten. The last hieroglyph was written in the 6th century CE, sealing the end of a civilization's sacred language. But Egypt did not vanish. Its monuments remained, whispering their stories to the desert winds. And though the gods faded from daily worship, their myths endured, carried into new cultures, inspiring generations. The fall of Egypt was not death, it was transformation, the passing of one age into another, and as the Nile itself. When Alexander the Great conquered Egypt in 7th century BCE, the gods of the Nile did not disappear. Instead, they adapted, merging with Greek traditions and later Roman beliefs. Egyptian mythology became part of a wider Mediterranean world, shaping new religions and philosophies. Alexander himself traveled to the oracle of Amun at Siwa Oasis, where he was declared the son of the god. His successors, the Ptolemies, ruled Egypt as pharaohs, continuing ancient rituals. They built magnificent temples, such as Philae and Edfu, that honored traditional gods, but also blended Greek art and style. During this time, new hybrid gods emerged. The most famous was Serapis, a fusion of Osiris and Apis, with aspects of Zeus. Serapis became a popular deity across the Hellenistic world, worshipped not only in Egypt but in Greece and Rome. The cult of Isis spread even further. Her temples rose in Athens, Pompeii, and even Rome itself. To sailors, she was the protector of the seas; to mothers, the guardian of children; to rulers, a source of divine legitimacy. Her worship endured well into the Roman Empire, long after many Egyptian traditions had faded. Though Egypt was no longer independent, its myths continued to live and evolve. They proved timeless, adapting to new cultures while keeping their sacred essence alive. For centuries after Egypt's fall, the sacred language of the gods, the hieroglyphs, fell silent. By the 6th century CE, no one could read them. Temples were abandoned, papyrus decayed, and the voices of Egypt's priests vanished into the sands of time. For over 1,000 years, the meaning of hieroglyphs was a mystery. Travelers gazed at temple walls and obelisks covered in strange symbols. Birds, eyes, serpents, and stars, but none could decipher their secrets. Some thought they were mystical codes. Others believed they were mere decorations. The key to unlocking this lost language came in Ancient when Napoleon's soldiers discovered the Rosetta Stone. This black basalt slab bore the same inscription in 3 scripts: Greek, Demotic, and hieroglyphic. Scholars realized it could be the bridge to rediscovery. Decades later, the French scholar Jean-François Champollion cracked the code. By comparing names like Ptolemy and Cleopatra in Greek and hieroglyphs, he unlocked the phonetic system hidden within the symbols. In Bait Asherah, he announced his breakthrough. The language of ancient Egypt had spoken once more. The rediscovery of hieroglyphs breathed life into forgotten myths and histories. Suddenly, the walls of Karnak, the tombs of the Valley of the Kings, and the papyri of the dead could be read again. Egypt's gods, kings, and people returned to the world, their voices echoing across centuries. Through this triumph, humanity regained a lost dialogue with one of the world's greatest civilizations. Though the temples have crumbled and the priests' chants have faded, the gods of Egypt still live on in the imagination of the modern world. Egyptian mythology has inspired artists, writers, filmmakers, and dreamers for centuries. continuing to shape culture far beyond the Nile. In the Renaissance, scholars marveled at obelisks and sphinxes brought to Europe, symbols of wisdom and mystery. In the Judeo century, with the rediscovery of hieroglyphs and the treasures of the Valley of the Kings, Egyptomania swept across Europe. Pharaohs and gods appeared in paintings, operas, and novels, their images fueling fascination with the ancient world. In modern times, Egyptian mythology continues to thrive. Movies and television resurrect gods like Anubis, Ra, and Osiris, blending history with fantasy. Video games and novels retell their myths for new generations, giving fresh life to the eternal stories. Even fashion and architecture borrow Egyptian motifs, reminding us of their timeless power. But beyond entertainment, Egyptian mythology still inspires deeper thought. Its themes, life, death, rebirth, order, and chaos, remain universal. The Eye of Horus still symbolizes protection. The Ankh remains a sign of eternal life. These symbols continue to resonate across cultures, carrying the voices of the ancients into the present. The gods of Egypt never truly died. They transformed, living on in our stories, our art, and our endless fascination with eternity. From the waters of Nun to the judgment halls of Osiris, from the battles of Horus and Set to the eternal sunrise of Ra, Egyptian mythology tells a story that never ends. It is not only a record of gods and kings, but a mirror of humanity's eternal search for meaning. The Egyptians believed that nothing truly perished. The sun died each night, but was reborn at dawn. The Nile flooded and receded, yet always returned. The pharaoh passed into the afterlife, but his son took the throne. In this endless cycle, they saw eternity, and in many ways, their gods proved them right. Though the temples stand in ruins and the rituals have faded, the names of Isis, Horus, and Anubis still echo across the world. Their myths continue to teach us about love, justice, courage, and the eternal battle between order and chaos. The legacy of Egyptian mythology is more than stone statues or ancient papyri. It is the idea that life and death are connected, that truth is sacred, and that humanity is part of something greater than itself. The gods of Egypt may no longer walk among us, but their presence endures. In every sunrise, in every star, and in every story retold. They are eternal. Dear travelers of time and seekers of truth, our journey through the sands of Egypt has come to its end. Yet in truth, it is only a new beginning. Together, we have walked with gods and pharaohs, sailed across the heavens with Ra, descended into the Duat with Anubis, and stood in the eternal light of Osiris. We have witnessed love, betrayal, triumph, and transformation. Stories as ancient as the Nile, yet as alive, today as when they were first spoken. Egyptian mythology is more than tales of the past. It is a mirror of the human spirit. It reminds us that life is a cycle, that justice and truth matter, and that even in darkness, light will rise again. These stories endure because they speak to something eternal within us. The desire for meaning, for balance, and for connection with forces greater than ourselves. As you return from this sacred journey, carry with you the wisdom of Ma'at, the courage of Horus, the devotion of Isis, and the eternal light of Ra. May their stories guide you, inspire you, and remind you that the divine lives not only in myths, but also within you.